3:14 a.m. Strait of Hormuz. High above the sea, an MQ-9 Reaper drone is monitoring the Iranian coastline. Suddenly, a high-powered radar beam from a hidden air defense site on Qasem Island locks onto its position. In less than 5 seconds, an Iranian surface-to-air missile roars off its launcher. The drone's flight computer tries an emergency evasive maneuver, but the missile has already struck. The MQ-9 Reaper is blown to pieces. Debris plunges into the sea. Over the most vital oil route on the planet, the U.S. has just lost its star player. On the coast, the liquid-fueled engines of 20 more missiles begin to roar. Their target, the American base in Kuwait, but the U.S. air defense computer still shows 0 targets. The American base in Kuwait sits on flat desert, covering an area the size of 500 football fields. 3:28 a.m. About 64 kilometers from the base, the ground near the Iranian border begins to shake. 20 heavy trucks disguised as ordinary shipping containers drive off a remote dirt road. The tops of these containers slide open. Inside are mobile launch vehicles. Until the very last second, they perfectly evaded satellite surveillance. 25 to 110 ballistic missiles ignite simultaneously. They shoot straight toward the edge of space, then slam toward the U.S. base at 3 times the speed of sound. But these missiles are only the first wave of this attack. While U.S. radar is fixated on the skies, 50 Shahed-136 suicide drones are catapulted from flatbed trucks. The base's air defense system is said to be world-class, but even it has physical limits. It's like a person catching falling tennis balls. Toss 1 or 2, he can easily catch them. But throw 70 at once, he'll be completely overwhelmed. As missiles and drones keep closing in, the U.S. air defense computer starts seeing ghosts. The drones are flying so close together, the radar reads them as a single large target. Then they suddenly scatter. In an instant, the computer lags for a split second. It can't calculate which target to engage first. To make matters worse, a new problem arises. The U.S. base launches the first wave of interceptors, but they veer off course. The missiles spiral out of control and end up crashing into the empty desert. The Iranian military activates large-scale GPS jammers. Their fake signals are much stronger than the real GPS ones. The base fires its best interceptors, but all they hit is sand. The base is now defenseless, and 70 engines flare up on the horizon. As the U.S. base in Kuwait faces life or death, a completely different threat is quietly approaching. Deep in the Persian Gulf, a U.S. aircraft carrier cruises at roughly 48 kilometers per hour. This colossal ship's sonar can hear a whale's heartbeat kilometers away. But Iran's Ghadir-class mini-subs are built for this purpose. Their size is so small, their movement is nearly undetectable. At long range, they can't be tracked at all. This sub has been lying on the sandy seabed for 3 whole days, just waiting for a chance. And now the carrier is moving blindly towards it. Meanwhile, a U.S. courier is on a mission inside an Iranian tunnel, following Washington's order for restraint from the fleet. They want to show a non-threatening posture to encourage negotiations. Because of that order, the carrier has kept a straight, steady course. It's basically an open target for any lurking enemy. Suddenly, the sonar alarm blares on the lead U.S. destroyer. That Iranian sub has just surfaced only about 16 kilometers from the carrier. At this range, the carrier is a sitting duck. The U.S. destroyer doesn't dare open fire. If they drop depth charges on the sub, the explosion would be too close. It could even crack the carrier's own hull. On one side, a $13 billion warship and 5,000 lives. And now, they're being held hostage by a sub that costs less than a U.S. fighter jet. They can't call for backup because the Iranians are monitoring every radio frequency. America's firepower is unmatched, but the enemy sees the perfect attack position. One wrong move, and the backbone of this fleet could be shattered. Even with the sub clinging to the carrier's hull like a ghost, U.S. forces still decide to launch jets. 2 F-35 stealth fighters are catapulted into the night sky. Their mission is clear. Find the mobile radar site on Qasem Island, guiding missiles toward Kuwait, and destroy it. The Iranian military didn't hide the radar in a reinforced concrete bunker, nor under desert camouflage nets. They put the system inside ordinary, brightly colored shipping containers, and set them right in the middle of the port of Abbas commercial docks. The port is packed with giant civilian freighters, loaded with oil bound for other countries, food, and medicine. If U.S. jets fire missiles at the port to hit the radar, it would cause massive civilian casualties and sink neutral flagships. The Revolutionary Guards are betting the U.S. won't fire easily. For every second, the American pilots hesitate. The missiles headed for Kuwait get one more second to lock onto their targets. US jets circle at about 9 kilometers altitude. No matter how stealthy they are, it makes no difference now. Iran's radar hidden in the containers keeps sending out pulse signals, guiding another wave of drones at the Kuwait base. The arrival of an EA-18G Growler electronic warfare jet breaks the stalemate. The F-35 relies on stealth, but the EA-18G Growler is an aggressive hunter. The Iranians thought they had the upper hand because they're jamming GPS signals across the entire region with overwhelming power. But this EA-18G Growler brings a secret weapon, a system that turns the enemy's strength into a fatal weakness. It uses what's called passive emitter location. Fighter jets usually ping targets with radar. This one only listens for Iranian jamming signals, like a long, piercing scream in the night. For the Growler, that scream is a beacon. The jet follows the noise straight in. Beneath its wing, an AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missile ignites and launches. It doesn't look for the physical radar. It homes in on the radar's electronic breathing. The Iranian commander on Qasem Island sees the HARM on his screen and instantly realizes it's a checkmate. If he keeps the radar running to guide the missiles at Kuwait, the HARM will home in on the signal and smash into his container, vaporizing everything inside. If he turns off the radar to save his life, the missiles headed for Kuwait lose their guidance and become blind, falling into the sea. Radar on means death. Radar off means mission failed. The Iranian commander decisively cuts the radar power. He thought the missile lost its signal. He believed the missile itself was now safe, but the HARM missile has a built-in memory feature. It firmly remembered the exact coordinates before the signal disappeared. Even under complete electromagnetic silence, the missile kept diving. It struck the orange shipping container in Abbas port with incredible precision. The explosion was massive, but the damage was tightly controlled. The warhead's directional blast shredded the radar equipment, but it didn't affect the nearby device at all. In an instant, the Revolutionary Guard lost their eyes on Qasem Island. Throughout this confrontation, the US military finally got their first clear look at the battlefield. One-way transparency was over. The hunter had become the hunted. On the radar screens at the US base, what used to be filled with flickering ghosts and fake signals now suddenly looked clear. The base's automated defense system came alive with a roaring sound. Standards interceptor missiles sprang skyward. They headed straight for what was coming down at 4 times the speed of sound. The Fatah 110 ballistic missiles. The explosion from the impact was immense. About 8 kilometers above the desert, Iran's missile was blown into a stream of metallic fragments and unburned fuel. But the real threat was the drone swarm, made up of 50 naval drones from Zeras 1, 3, and 6. Under normal circumstances, the US military has to use a $2 million missile to take out a cheap drone. That's precisely the cost ratio game the Revolutionary Guard wanted to play. The US responded with APKWS, Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System. The military dug out old unguided rockets from the 1970s and fitted them with a $25,000 mini laser guidance kit in the middle, instantly turning cheap scrap iron into precision weapons. Inside the base, an invisible laser beam locked onto each drone one by one. The APKWS rockets followed the laser as if they were drawn by magnets, flying right toward it. These rockets fired in salvos of 4 at a time. In less than 3 minutes, 30 out of the 50 drones were destroyed. For the handful that slipped through, the base had one last line of defense, the CIWS, the close-in defense system. It could weave a wall in the air, made up of metal projectiles. Any drone that hit this metal wall would be torn to pieces. The scene cuts back to the Persian Gulf. This aircraft carrier was no longer a passive lamb waiting for slaughter. Once the jamming was lifted, the fleet's communications network instantly came back to life. Now, that mini-submarine was blinded. Its tactical value depended entirely on stealth. Once its location was exposed, its only trump card was gone. The hull was too small. It couldn't take heavy firepower at all, and it had only 2 torpedo tubes total. The Iranian crew knew it well. As soon as the propeller turned, or the torpedo tube doors opened, the underwater hydrophones would instantly detect the noise. The US fleet hadn't even fired a single torpedo. Instead, a US destroyer parked directly above the submarine, using depth-charge defense mode, dropping explosive canisters set to detonate at specific depths. The aim wasn't to sink it, but to create a huge wall of water pressure, using physical shock to keep the submarine from holding its balance. Explosives detonated one by one in a ring around the sub. The enemy finally realized the giant they were trying to hunt just now was now standing right over their heads. The US commander sent a low-frequency radio signal underwater, directly calling out to the submarine. The instructions were extremely simple. surface or die. This Iranian submarine's battery was about to run out. The crew was terrified by the endless bombardment of depth charges. They had no choice but to comply. The black V-shaped conning tower surfaced on the blue sea, just a few hundred meters from the massive hull of the carrier. The U.S. military didn't need to sink it to claim victory. Just intimidating it with water pressure and noise forced this hidden killer out of the deep. The killer that once threatened the $13 billion warship had now become a tin can floating on the water, surrounded on all sides by firepower that could blow it to pieces. Iran's command center had turned into a row of smoking craters. The HARM missile precisely wiped out the container holding the radar equipment. The Revolutionary Guard lost far more than expensive hardware. They lost a specially trained operations team and the high-speed data link for battlefield communications. Imagine a boxer trapped in a room with the power shut off, fighting a world champion. He may have huge muscles, his gloves may be heavy, but he has no idea where to swing. While news of the tactical collapse reached Tehran, the Revolutionary Guard made one last desperate move. They knew they had lost. Hardline commanders ordered a final swarm attack out of frustration, launching from the coastline. 30 fast attack boats burst out from hidden coves, speeding toward America at about 80 kilometers per hour. The carrier looking on the surface like a school of ravenous piranhas. The aircraft carrier, towering like a skyscraper. These boats tried to get close, to fire their short-range anti-ship missiles at the carrier's waterline armor. But the U.S. fleet didn't even bother to turn its main guns. The carriers simply launched for MH-60R Seahawk helicopters. They were equipped with AGM-11 for Hellfire missiles, hovering about 4.8 kilometers away. While outside the range of the boat's small-caliber weapons, the pilots used laser targeting on the leading boats one by one. When the Hellfire hit, the explosion was intense, shattering the fiberglass hull into thousands of pieces. Less than 60 seconds, the first 6 boats were wiped out on the surface. The remaining 24 boats didn't even dare take a second missile. Watching the huge fireball rise on the water, they finally understood that this so-called asymmetric Wolfpack tactic was pure fantasy. They quickly turned around and fled back to the shore with their tails between their legs. The Revolutionary Guard thought numbers would beat quality, but the carrier had the sky as its shield. That's a level those boats just can't reach. The sun had just risen, and the conflict was already over. Iran's military operational system had fallen into total paralysis. The radar was blown up. The drone swarm turned to scrap metal. The killer they'd hoped for. The submarine was now a trophy for the U.S. to show off. U.S. forces still occupied the Gulf. Plenty of ammo. Tanks full of fuel. As soon as the one-way blindfold was removed, the outcome was always going to be a one-sided massacre. Before the video ends, about the Hellfire missile, there's an almost unnoticed fun fact. Everyone knows it's a high-tech tank killer, but its name actually hides a very different history. Hellfire is actually an acronym in English for helicopter-launched, laser-guided, fire and forget. But surprisingly, in its early development stage, it wasn't even intended as a weapon. Its original engineering concept was just a heavy-duty logging tool to clear paths. The military wanted to find a way to let helicopters clear dense bushes, trees, and obstacles, so ground tank units could move more easily through complex terrain. That's exactly why, in modern warfare, the original purpose of a weapon doesn't matter. What matters is, when the rules of engagement change, how much destructive power it can unleash.